can hear me, right?
We can hear you, but yes, now I can see you also. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Look, today is World Environment Day. At least we can pause and think and then do something. So it's a good marker in the calendar for those who might forget. I mean, I'm not one of them, as you know. So.
Exactly. You've been running a renewable energy company based in Singapore. Can you give us a bit of background about what you actually do and how you started this?
Yes, of course. So during the day, I am chairman and CEO of a renewable energy business, which is headquartered in Singapore and basically builds, finances, operates, and owns solar, wind, and other renewable energy assets in Asia. And that for us is mostly the Philippines, India, Thailand, and Indonesia and Vietnam. So over 2 billion people, all of whom need more energy, so where energy demand is growing, and where it really, really matters for the world whether they build that additional energy from fossil fuels, so oil, gas, and coal, or from renewables.
Right.
And, in particular, if they built their additional energy from fossil fuels, they would fry us all. So it would tip the balance. And then in the evening, as you know, I host a podcast, The Angry Clean Energy Guy, where I basically act as a climate and clean energy activist and champion.
And how often do you do your podcast?
Every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks. We must follow that and we must share these details with the audience. COVID-19 has brought a lot of changes to all of us. But we've seen a lot of changes also in the environment. Most of them have been very positive. What do you hope that we can learn from this experience when it comes to renewables and the environment?
Look, that's a fantastic question. I can tell you what I learned. Number one, I learned that we can, as a race, as a human race, we can deploy an enormous amount of money very quickly, very, very quickly in months and effect massive change if we wanted to and when we want to. Because in COVID-19, we've mobilized something like $10 trillion globally in a matter of 3-4 months, right? Just yesterday, the ECB and the German government together deployed another 800 billion euros of resources. Now that's something which is very good to see in this context, but also very intriguing from a climate change context, because we've been shouting for decades about deploying really a fraction of these resources to solve climate change. So now I know that the resources are there and that we can deploy them if we want. So to take you somewhere else, Leah, the second thing I learned is that we have many powerful weapons around us against climate change. And one of the most humble but amazing ones is the bicycle, just the very simple bicycle. Because what we've seen in this lockdown, without public transportation, for example, in the larger cities, is that the bicycle not only gives you social distancing, but also obviously is friendly, it's clean, it doesn't cost much to manufacture or to own, and it throws into question, the way we're building our entire infrastructure and the way we manage it. So there's 2 very quick lessons from the coronavirus pandemic.
Do you think people, you mentioned the bicycle, do you think people will be who don't use bicycles, will they be quite positive about starting to use a bike? How responsive do you think they'll be?
Look, I can tell you that the numbers of bicycles that are being purchased around the world have gone up very significantly, but obviously not everyone can ride a bicycle. I mean, I'm using it more as an example of that highlights how we built our cities for fossil fuels. We built our cities for the oil and gas industry, not the other way around. So we use 60% of our cities just to create space for cars. And I'm talking about high density cities around the world. So, we simply don't need all these cars. Public transport and bicycles, everybody's pretty much fine most of the time. Obviously, you'll need some, but nowhere near what you need. And then if you don't use all these cars, or if they all become electrical, then basically, boom, you've solved 50% of the climate change problem.
We're talking about travel. Can we touch a bit on airlines? Obviously, the airline business has seen a huge downturn today. We hear of people like Warren Buffett leaving the airline business. What do you think the future of the airlines is going to be?
Look, it's a complicated subject, but I put out half a podcast on that, I think, recently. So kind of three things. The first one is obviously airlines are critical for global infrastructure. It's not like we can live without airlines. So we need airlines. But what's also obvious is that we have mispriced airline tickets because we haven't built into them the environmental cost of airlines. And also airlines, we've let them basically buy back shares and give dividends out in an unsustainable way that finds them totally unprepared for even a 3 month disruption in their business. So if you're a restaurant owner, I understand that 3 months is really tough. But if you're, Delta Airlines or American Airlines or Air France or British Airways, I mean, come on, please. Why are you unprepared? So, number one, they have been, frankly, grossly mismanaged from a sustainability perspective. Number two, they have not priced in their environmental impact. And that's not just their fault. That's also government's fault around the world, because they gave them a free pass, effectively, in terms of their environmental impact. So we need airlines, but we need more sustainable airlines. And the final point I would say on airlines is that right now around the world there are over 100 projects of electric planes that are under development. Now, these have been set back, in some cases, decades, by lobbying by oil, gas, coal companies and airlines to keep using oil, gas, and coal. And thankfully, these are now emerging from that lobbying shadow, and electric travel is something to very much look forward towards.
Why do you think there's a reluctance, and it's always an uphill struggle when it comes to the stock markets and to governments, when we're really talking about issues on renewables and clean energy?
Okay, another excellent question. So there's a few things going on there. First of all, as the stock market now knows, companies with a strong environmental, social, and governance record, which includes renewable energy companies, have outperformed companies with weak ESG standards on the stock market. So money is starting to see that you can do good and make money more so than by doing bad. Governments, are elected on 3, 4, 5-year electoral cycles. They find it very hard to get away from the lobbying power of oil, gas, and coal, and they're focused on their electability, which is short-term, and therefore have a problem focusing on long-term problems like changing our infrastructure so that it's more sustainable, changing our electricity systems, changing the way we power pretty much everything, and climate change, which is a problem that for many politicians still seems abstract, even though it's with us today violently every day.
I'd like to speak a bit about Europe and the EU COVID-19 recovery package. In your opinion, how much of that should be assigned to the environment and environmental issues and renewables?
Look, there are amazing things going on in the EU, and I, for one, I'm actually very happy about that. If you contrast the EU package or the German package or the French package or most countries' packages with any country outside the EU packages are by far the greenest. And just yesterday, Germany announced basically a wall of money in support of electric cars, green hydrogen, electrification, etc., and renewables. And so the EU, I think, definitely has its heart in the right place, and now it's got its financial muscle in the right place. And I know that, Christine Lagarde at the ECB, the EU Commission, and everybody else is fully committed to the European Green Deal. And it's so nice to see them not escaping responsibility and blaming it on a pandemic. So all in all, I would give the EU very high marks on their green stimulus, so to speak, whereas you can't really say that about most other countries in the world, really all of them.
That sounds very positive. This morning, when we spoke this morning, we discussed the stats where our country, Malta, is the second worst after the Netherlands. Do you have any comments about that?
Yes, I do. Look, there's really not much of an excuse other than the power of incumbency. The Stanford University, under the leadership of a professor there called Mark Jacobson, has published roadmaps, which are free and public, about how about 150 different countries, including Malta, can actually be 100% powered by renewables by 2050. And the good news, of course, is that not only would everybody's health improve, but also Malta would save a lot of money. And the roadmap is there. It's just that sometimes the power of incumbency and local politics is such that progress is very slow. But I'm optimistic that ultimately the EU in general, and Malta in particular, is going to get their act together in a far more urgent way and act to become 100% renewables by 2050. And Malta as an island certainly can do that. I mean, it's actually not that complicated. As I said, health improves and there's more money in citizens' pockets.
Before we leave you for today, Assaad, I'd like to draw in Dr. Peter Grima, who is a lawyer and specializes in renewable energy and the environment. What do you think of what you've heard Assaad say today?
Well, I completely agree with Assaad when he says that we can do much better as a country from a local perspective. Malta at the moment has probably about 8% renewable energy contributions to our overall portfolio. We have significant potential when it comes to solar, and we are not utilizing that as well. We also have potential when it comes to waste to energy, when it comes to biomass. So definitely we can be doing much better. With respect to Malta, though, as opposed to other EU countries, we do have spatial limitations. So we can't be building the big solar farms that you'll find in other EU countries, but we definitely can do much better than we are doing at the moment. One thing that was also a problem for Malta when it came to developing more renewables was the fact that we kind of ditched our plans to build more, to invest in wind energy, which we thought from an environmental point of view was going to actually have some damaging effects to Malta because of the spatial limitations on land and offshore. Our shores are so deep, waters are so deep that the technology is not quite there yet, so they would have to be close to shore and would obviously have visual impacts on the local scenery.
Mm-hmm. Are we still with Assaad? I think he's still with us, isn't he? Are you listening to Peter? What are your comments when you hear from a local specialist, Assaad?
Look, I mean, I think we're both in agreement. The one thing I would say is that the Stanford University roadmap for Malta actually relies mostly on solar PV for about 80% of the country's requirements and very, very little on onshore wind, 1.36%, and zero on offshore wind. Mm-hmm. So look, there is a way, there is a roadmap. It now just takes for the various stakeholders to kind of get their head together and do it for, to achieve the two objectives that I outlined: better health for all the citizens and more money in their pocket. So it's,
Sure.
hopefully it's around the corner.
Just one last question. As the world shifts onto clean energy and renewables, what happens to nations that are dependent on oil and corporates that are dependent on oil production?
Well, another excellent question. So let me start with the corporates because it's a little bit easier. Most companies that were manufacturing the little cars you sat on to be pulled by a horse before we invented the automobile did not actually transition to becoming car companies. And so I'm not very optimistic personally on oil and gas companies being able to transition, because in their DNA, they really just want to dig underground or underwater and extract resources. And it's very hard for them to deal with free resources like the sun and the wind and the water. So I'm not optimistic on companies. I think they'll become dinosaurs pretty soon and then they'll disappear, but they'll be replaced by other companies who create jobs in any case at a faster rate. Now, as to governments have no excuse. Governments that rely enormously on oil and gas have had plenty of time to prepare and still have time to prepare, and they would just be letting down their citizens if they're found out unprepared. So, and it's also good news, Leah, because as you know, often when you have a lot of oil, it's a curse from a social development perspective.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of case studies on that. So, maybe it's good news that they no longer have oil and gas.
Absolutely. I thank you very much, Assaad. Thank you for spending time with us today. And I hope we'll join you again very soon. That was Assaad Razzouk, a guru in renewable energy. That was very interesting, I think, Peter, because we're going to close this part of the program and then have a short break.